Charles Duke spent 3 days on the moon's surface, but it took him over 50 years to finally describe the massive angular blocks that proved we were not the first ones there.
There is no way that anything bigger than a basketball can be standing straight up on the lunar surface.
This is not just a conspiracy theory anymore, because the data from the seismic sensors and the testimony from other moonwalkers all point to the same conclusion.
NASA would have known this, and that one of the reasons that they sent their mission there was so that the astronauts of the Apollo mission could gain more information about these artificial structures on the moon.
The moon is not just a dead rock, it is a preserved site of ancient engineering that was never meant for us to inhabit. So, here is the deal. We did not stop going because we ran out of money. We stopped because we found a boundary. Silent Apollo Secrets. Charles Duke stood in the Descartes Highlands in 1972 and looked at something that should not have existed on a natural satellite. He was more than 3 miles away from his lunar module when he came across a wall made of perfectly angular blocks that stretched for over 300 feet. These were not random rocks scattered by a meteorite impact. They had sharp, straight lines and were stacked with a precision that suggested intentional construction. Duke was a trained pilot and a scientist, and he knew that nature does not create right angles on that scale without a reason. He called back to Houston to report the anomaly, expecting a flurry of questions and excitement from the team of scientists back on Earth. Instead, he got 30 seconds of absolute silence. It was as if the people in mission control already knew exactly what he was looking at and were waiting for him to stop talking. When the radio finally crackled back to life, they did not ask for more photos or a closer inspection. They gave him flat, dry instructions to continue his sample collection and move to the next site. Basically, they shut him down. This silence is one of the most suspicious moments in the entire history of the Apollo program. It suggests a level of knowledge where the astronauts were just the boots on the ground, while the people in the back rooms held the true map of the lunar surface. For starters, the Descartes Highlands were chosen specifically for their unique geology. Yet, when the most unique geological feature in human history was found, NASA turned a blind eye. Duke is now 89 years old, and in recent years, his descriptions of these blocks have become more detailed. He describes them as being covered in a thick layer of lunar regolith, which means they have been there for millions, if not billions, of years. The precision of the alignment and the non-natural formation are hands down the most compelling evidence of an ancient presence on the moon. Many are not seeing the truth here because they are focused on the rocks he brought back, like the massive Big Muley specimen, which was the largest moon rock ever returned to Earth. But the real treasure was the visual evidence of a structure that looked like a foundation or a perimeter wall. What most people do not realize is that Duke and his partner spent over 20 hours outside their craft, covering 16 miles in the rover, and throughout that time, they were being watched by something more than just cameras. The wall was not a trick of the light or a strange shadow. It was a solid object that blocked their path and stood as a silent witness to a time before humanity ever looked at the stars. The crazy part is that this report was buried in the transcripts for decades, hidden behind technical jargon and boring geology notes. But when you listen to the original audio, the tension in the room is palpable. Houston did not want him looking at that wall. They wanted him to grab his rocks and get out of there as fast as possible. This is a key detail that suggests a pre-existing awareness of these structures. If NASA already knew the wall was there, they must have seen it in the orbital photography from the lunar orbiter missions. Yet those photos were never released with enough resolution to see the blocks. It is not that simple, though, because Duke was actually there, touching the dust that covered the evidence. The mystery of these silent blocks is only the beginning of a much larger puzzle regarding the moon's true nature. Seismic sound anomalies. When the Apollo 12 astronauts crashed their lunar module ascent stage into the surface, something happened that left the scientific community in a state of shock. The moon rang like a bell for over an hour. This is a key detail because a solid body of rock like Earth does not vibrate for that long after an impact. It usually settles within minutes. But the moon continued to hum and vibrate as if it were a hollow sphere or a lattice-reinforced structure. Between 1969 and 1977, the seismic stations left on the moon recorded thousands of moonquakes and impacts, and the data was always the same. The duration of the ringing was inconsistent with every model of a solid planetary body. And get this. Some of the vibrations lasted for nearly 4 hours after the Apollo 13 third stage impact. This led several researchers to propose that the moon might be hollow, or at least possess a very low-density interior, protected by a thick, reinforced outer shell. It sounds like science fiction, but the numbers do not lie. If the moon is an artificial satellite, then the walls Charles Duke saw might just be the tip of the iceberg. They could be the external remnants of a massive internal system that has been housed inside the moon for eons. One of the most overlooked aspects of this theory is the fact that the moon's gravity is not uniform. There are massive concentrations of mass called mascons that suggest the interior is not a natural series of layers, but a collection of heavy objects or structures hidden beneath the crust. Everyone is obsessed with looking for life on Mars, but we have a ringing, hollow mystery right in our own backyard. If the moon was engineered to be a stable platform for observation, or even a base, it would explain why the crater geometries on the far side are so different from the near side. Some craters are incredibly wide but surprisingly shallow, as if the impactors hit an armored layer that they could not penetrate. A lot of people are confused about why NASA would stop recording this seismic data in 1977, especially when it was providing such world-altering insights. They claimed it was a budget issue, but the crazy part is that they were still getting clear signals when they pulled the plug. It feels like they were afraid of what a few more years of data would prove to the public. If the moon is indeed hollow or artificially reinforced, it would mean that the entire history of our solar system needs to be rewritten. See, the moon is exactly the right size and at exactly the right distance to perfectly cover the sun during an eclipse. The odds of that happening naturally are almost zero. When you combine that mathematical perfection with the fact that the body rings like a bell, you start to see why people like Charles Duke were told to keep their mouths shut. The seismic data was not just noise, it was a blueprint. It showed that the moon has a shell that is approximately 20 miles thick, made of highly dense materials, and an interior that is either empty or filled with a support structure. This is hands down the most ignored scientific discovery of the 20th century. If we had stayed on the moon, we would have eventually drilled deep enough to find the truth, but that is exactly what someone did not want us to do. The ringing of the moon suggests a structure beneath the dust that we were never supposed to find. Forgotten space hardware. NASA had everything ready for missions 18, 19, and 20. The hardware was built, the crews were trained, and the targets were selected. Then, suddenly the plug was pulled. The official story is that the Nixon administration wanted to save money and shift focus to the Skylab and the Space Shuttle program. But here is the deal. We had already spent the vast majority of the money. The rockets were sitting in the hangars. To cancel the missions when the equipment was already paid for is like buying a luxury car and then refusing to drive it because you do not want to pay for the gas. It does not make sense. Many are not seeing the truth here because they believe the political narrative, but the timing is very suspicious. It happened right after the Apollo 16 and 17 missions reported some of the most intense anomalies yet. Astronauts were not just seeing rocks. They were seeing blue lights, unexplained sky objects, and geometric shapes in the shadows of the craters. Buzz Aldrin and several other moonwalkers have referenced unexplained phenomena in their private logs and later interviews. The truth is that we did not run out of money. We were told to leave. One theory is that the structures Charles Duke saw were a boundary marker. Imagine landing on a deserted island only to find a fence with a sign you cannot read. You would probably think twice about staying. The Descartes Highlands and other landing sites showed that the moon was not as empty as it appeared from Earth. There were domes, bridges, and towers captured in archival frames by people like George Leonard and Ken Johnston. Johnston was a whistleblower who worked for NASA and claimed he was ordered to retouched photos that showed ancient alien cities and machinery. This is a key detail because it suggests that the cover-up started the moment the first film was developed. If there are mechanical remnants buried in the lunar regolith, then our presence there was a trespass. The crazy part is that we stayed away for over 50 years while technology advanced at an exponential rate. We could have built a base 10 times over by now. Instead, we retreated to low Earth orbit and focused on the space shuttle. It was a strategic pause, a way to keep the public's eyes on the ground while the government figured out how to deal with the fact that the moon is occupied or at least spoken for. Nobody expected this to happen, especially not after the huge success of the first landing. But the fear in the halls of power was real. If the public found out that we were not alone, the social order would have collapsed overnight. So, they made up a story about budgets and moved on to safer projects. They left the Saturn V rockets to rot in museums, serving as giant monuments to a program that was stopped dead in its tracks. Whereas the astronauts who were slated for the final missions were reassigned or retired, taking their secrets with them. But you cannot hide a 100-meter wall forever. Eventually, someone was going to talk, and Charles Duke decided that his 89th year was the right time to let the world know what he saw in the Descartes Highlands. The sudden end of the Apollo program left behind more questions than the rocks could ever answer. Artificial crater shapes. Charles Duke was not the only one to notice that the moon looked like a construction site in some areas. During Apollo 14, Edgar Mitchell reported seeing blue lights and other anomalies that did not fit the profile of natural gas emissions. When you look at the photos from the Descartes Highlands, you see linear patterns that defy the chaotic nature of impact craters. The blocks Duke described were 100 meters long, which is over 300 feet. That is the size of a football field. You do not get a 300-foot-long wall of perfectly straight blocks from a volcanic eruption or a meteorite hit. The crazy part is that these structures are preserved perfectly because there is no wind or rain on the moon. However, the accumulation of lunar dust suggests they are ancient beyond our understanding. Scientists talk about micrometeorite gardening, which is the slow process of dust building up over millions of years. For a wall that large to be almost completely covered, it would have to have been built eons before humans even mastered fire. This brings up the question of who built it. Whistleblowers like Ken Johnston have pointed to the geometric signatures in unvisited zones of the moon as proof of a global network of ancient activity. There are gravity maps that reveal subsurface voids that align perfectly with these reported walls. It is like the moon has a skeleton of dense material and empty rooms. Some people believe the moon was moved into its current orbit by an advanced civilization to act as a stabilizer for Earth's tides and climate. If that is true, then the structures are part of the maintenance system or the crew quarters for whoever brought it here. It is not that simple, though, because the isotopic signatures of some returned samples were inconsistent with the surrounding dirt. They hinted at manufactured materials, or at least refined minerals, that do not occur naturally in that concentration. This is a key detail that NASA has kept under wraps for decades. They want us to believe the moon is a boring, dead rock so that we do not ask why we are not living there. But the evidence from the astronauts themselves tells a different story. They saw the towers, they saw the walls, and they heard the silence from Houston when they tried to report it. There are still many rumors in the air, but the visual evidence of domes and bridges in the background of Apollo 16 photos is hard to ignore. Some of these structures are miles long, stretching across the lunar plains like abandoned highways. When Duke walked near the wall, he was stepping on the foundations of a history that does not belong to us. The rover tracks and his own boot prints are now the only recent additions to a landscape that has been engineered for billions of years. We are looking at a museum of a civilization that might have left our solar system long ago, or perhaps they are still there, watching us from the hollow interior. The relics on the lunar surface are a silent testimony to a history we are only beginning to uncover. Lunar territorial claims. So, here is the deal. We are finally heading back to the lunar surface with the Artemis program, and the whole world is holding its breath to see if we run into the same strange things Charles Duke saw over 50 years ago. But here's the catch. We have way better gear now than we did in 1972. Back then, the astronauts had film cameras and basic radios. Today we have high-definition sensors and cameras that can see every tiny detail from miles away. The crazy part is that even with this new tech, the pictures we are getting from the lunar orbiters still show those same weird straight lines and boxy shapes in the highlands. It is not just a glitch in the old photos. These things are really there, and they have been waiting for us to come back and finish what we started. But the new missions are being very careful. Instead of just landing anywhere, NASA is targeting the South Pole and other specific spots. They say it is because there is ice in the shadows, but many are not seeing the truth here. For starters, the South Pole is one of the most rugged and mysterious parts of the moon. It is full of deep craters where the sun never shines, and that is exactly where you would hide a base or a massive piece of ancient machinery if you did not want it to be seen from Earth. One of the most overlooked aspects of this new moon race is the tension between the big countries. China and the United States are both rushing to get their boots back on the ground and claim their own territory. A lot of people are confused about why this is happening now, after we stayed away for so long. It might be because they both know the moon has limited safe zones, where these ancient structures do not mess with human electronics or safety. See, if the wall Charles Duke found is actually a sensor or a boundary marker, you would want to know where the next one is before you start building a house. Some wild theories suggest that the governments are not just looking for water or rocks. They are looking for the source of the power that Duke and his partner felt when they were 6 miles away from their landing craft. There are rumors of a massive ancient battery, or even a communication hub buried deep under the Descartes Highlands. The thing is, if one country gets their hands on that kind of tech, they would hands down become the boss of the entire planet. This is a key detail because it changes the moon from a scientific playground into a giant prize that everyone wants to win. We are not just exploring anymore. We are competing for a secret that has been hidden in the dust for millions of years. The 30-second silence from Houston during Apollo 16 was a reminder that the people in charge knew the moon was already occupied. Now, we are going back to find out if the owners are still around, or if they left the keys in the door for us to find. But as we get closer to the launch dates, the warnings are getting louder. We have to wonder if we are actually invited this time, or if we are just breaking into a place that was locked for a reason. Something is waiting in the deep shadows of the lunar South Pole to change everything we know. Hollow Moon Secrets. The crazy part is that we might find out we never truly belonged on Earth in the first place. One of the wildest theories floating around right now is that the moon is actually a giant laboratory or a library that holds the DNA of everything that ever lived. Some people believe that the structures Charles Duke saw were not built by aliens, but by an ancient version of us that lived hundreds of thousands of years ago. Basically, Earth was the backup plan after a huge disaster happened in space, and the moon was the ship that brought us here. It sounds like a movie, but when you look at how the moon rings like a bell and has perfectly straight walls, it starts to make a lot of sense. If the moon is hollow, as the seismic data suggests, then there could be entire cities or hangars inside that are miles wide. This is not just a guess, because when NASA crashed a lunar module into the surface, the whole thing vibrated for over an hour. That does not happen with a solid rock. A solid rock would just absorb the hit and go quiet. The only things that ring like that are bells or empty metal containers. Some researchers think the moon was towed into its current spot specifically to keep Earth stable. Without the moon, our planet would wobble and the weather would be a total mess. This is a key detail because it means the moon is a piece of hardware, not just a random rock. The moon is exactly the right size and exactly the right distance away to perfectly cover the sun during an eclipse. The odds of that happening by accident are almost zero. It is like someone parked it there and did the math to make sure it looked perfect from the ground. The wall Duke described could be a part of the outer shell that is starting to show through the dust after eons of being hit by space rocks. If you look at the craters on the moon, they are all very shallow. Even the widest ones do not go very deep. This suggests there is a super hard layer, maybe made of titanium, right under the surface dust that stops anything from poking through to the inside. But here is the catch. If the moon is a machine, who is the operator? The final warning might be that we are getting too close to the control room. Many are not seeing the truth here, but the reason we stayed away for 5 decades might be because we were told to stay out of the basement. When the Apollo astronauts were up there, they reported seeing lights and objects that followed them. Some people think there is a watcher, or an artificial intelligence that lives in the core of the moon. Its job is to monitor how fast humans develop. If we get too smart too fast, the machine might decide to reset the experiment. This would explain why civilizations on Earth seem to disappear and start over every few thousand years. We might be on our 10th or 20th try at building a society, and the moon is the record keeper that watches us fail and restart. Now that we are going back, we are acting like we own the place, but the moon has a way of reminding us how small we are. Every time an astronaut reports a blue light or a weird shadow, it is like the moon is blinking at us. What most people do not realize is that the Artemis missions are not just about flags and footprints. They are about finding out if we are the masters of our own destiny or just tenants in a house we did not build. There are still many rumors in the air about what we will find when we drill into the ice at the South Pole. Some say we will find frozen remnants of the people who built the walls. Others think we will find a signal that is still broadcasting into deep space. This signal could be a beacon telling someone in another galaxy that the humans on Earth have finally learned how to leave their backyard. Another theory is that the moon is actually a giant mirror or a projector. Some people believe that what we see in the sky is just a hologram designed to hide what is really happening in orbit. If the moon is a machine, it could be used to control the tides, which in turn controls the biological cycles of every living thing on Earth. This means our very behavior, our moods, and our growth are being managed by a piece of technology hanging over our heads. We think we are free, but we might be moving to a rhythm set by a computer inside the lunar crust. Hands down, the most important discovery is not going to be a new rock. It is going to be the truth about where we came from. We are at a turning point where the old lies about budget cuts and boring geology are falling apart. The fact that the moon is much older than the Earth is a huge red flag that scientists usually try to ignore. If it is older than the planet it orbits, it could not have come from Earth. It had to be brought here from somewhere else. Will we find a warm welcome on our return, or is the moon still off limits for a reason we cannot comprehend? Join the discussion, like and subscribe for more deep dives.